Some towns aren't just built on land, they're built on secrets. Welcome to Hollow Creek, a place where the past is buried deep but not forgotten. My name is Jacob Mercer, a journalist chasing redemption. But I found myself in a place where the church isn't just a building. It's a cage. We had 3 strange rules to survive the night. What's the most unsettling place you've ever visited? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to keep vigil in St. Michael's, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because tonight, the congregation isn't living. The service begins now. The first corpse I saw in Hollow Creek wasn't human. It was the town itself, splayed out under a bruised Colorado sky. Its bones picked clean by time and toxins. Roasted manna heads loomed like skeletal sentinels over streets, choked with withered weeds and the ghosts of collapsed buildings. The air, even in the dying light of late afternoon, tasted of sulfur and a deeper, more ancient bitterness, the exhalations of a poisoned earth. And at its heart, perched on a low, blighted hill like a carrion bird, sat St. Michael's Church, my new and quite possibly last place of employment. My name is Jacob Mercer. Until 6 months ago, it was a byline synonymous with sharp, if sometimes controversial, investigative journalism. Then came the Blackwood Parish expose, a deeply entrenched, well-funded cult masquerading as a benign spiritual retreat. I had been right, every damning word, but they had friends in high places, and the ensuing legal hurricane had shredded my career, my savings, and my reputation. Now, Jacob Mercer was more likely to be met with a slammed door or a lawyer's letter than a job offer. Desperation, I was learning, had a taste remarkably similar to the air in Hollow Creek. Father Alistair Thorne met me at the crumbling lich gate of St. Michael's. He was older than I expected, his frame as brittle as dried kindling, his face a roadmap of sorrowful lines. Yet his eyes, when they found mine, were startlingly clear, holding a profound, unsettling stillness. He offered a frail hand, the skin cool and papery. Mr. Mercer, his voice was soft, like dust settling in an unused room. Welcome. You have a certain resilience to have found your way here. The interview had been a series of cryptic emails, a surprisingly generous advance wired to my depleted account, and a set of GPS coordinates. No questions about my past, which was both a relief and a red flag. Inside, St. Michael's was cavernous and cold. The scent of decay was heavy, overlaid with the faint, lingering ghost of incense, and something else, something subterranean and metallic, like damp pennies or old blood. Dust motors danced in the weak shafts of light filtering through boarded-up windows. A few grimy, intact, stained glass panes showed biblical scenes in faded, mournful colors. Your duties are simple, Father Thorne said, his voice barely disturbing the oppressive silence as he led me towards the chancel. Maintain a presence. See that the church remains undisturbed from midnight until the first true light of dawn. No services are held here anymore. Not for the living, at least. A shiver, unrelated to the church's chill, traced its way down my spine. He stopped before the main altar, a heavy stone slab draped in a moth-eaten cloth. There are 3 rules, Mr. Mercer. They are not archaic suggestions. They are the conditions of your tenure here. They are absolute. His gaze pinned me, the earlier gentleness hardened by an edge of granite. First, he stated, his voice even, never light more than 7 candles on this altar, or any altar in this church, at any one time. The 8th candle, well, some flames are best left uninvited. My journalistic skepticism warred with the palpable wrongness of this place. And if it lights itself, a flicker of something, pain, annoyance, crossed his ancient face. Then you will have learned a valuable lesson about invitations. Pray it is not your last. He continued. Second, if you hear the sound of children singing, particularly from what might seem to be a lower level, or the crypts beneath the chancel. You will not investigate. This church, he paused, his eyes distant, has no basement accessible to the living. The songs are echoes, Mr. Mercer. Best left to fade. The metallic tang in the air seemed to intensify. And third, his voice dropped further, compelling me to lean in. After 3 o'clock in the morning, should the depictions in the stained glass windows appear to alter, to show scenes not originally rendered there, you will immediately close your eyes. You will recite the Lord's Prayer. Backwards. From Amen to our Father. Do not falter. Do not open your eyes until the recitation is complete. What comes to worship in the deep hours, Mr. Mercer, is not of our world, and it possesses a keen interest in souls that look upon its true face. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. This wasn't a night watchman job. This was a sentence. And what exactly am I keeping undisturbed, Father? He offered a sad, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. The delicate balance, Mr. Mercer, between memory and forgetting, between what is buried and what refuses to stay buried. He placed a heavy iron key in my palm. Lock up behind me. Your vigil begins at midnight. As his shuffling footsteps faded towards the narthex, a sound echoed from beneath the heavy stone slabs of the chancel floor. A faint, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 like Morse code from the deep earth. Father, I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness. His voice drifted back, already distant. The old mind workings, Mr. Mercer. The ground here is restless. It merely settles. Then he was gone, and I was alone. The weight of the iron key and anchor in the suffocating silence of St. Michael's. The sun bled out beyond the boarded windows, and the true dark of Hollow Creek began to press in. Midnight in St. Michael's was a different beast entirely. The last echo of Father Thorne's ancient car, sputtering away down the mountain path, had long faded, leaving a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. The air, already cold, dropped several more degrees, carrying on it the scent of turned earth and something else. Something coppery and sharp, like a freshly struck flint. I was alone, or at least, I hoped I was. The shadows cast by my single, battery-powered lantern seemed to stretch and writhe with a life of their own, clinging to the peeling frescoes and the grimacing gargoyles carved into the rotting choir stalls. This wasn't just an old church. It was a reliquary of sorrows. Remembering the first rule, I approached the main altar with a trepidation that had nothing to do with reverence. The candelabrum held 8 prongs. I carefully selected 7 beeswax candles from a dusty box Thorne had indicated. My hands surprisingly steady. One by one, I lit them. Tiny beacons against the encroaching abyss. 7 small flames, guttering weakly. I stepped back, took a deep breath, and turned to check the heavy oak door to the narthex, ensuring the iron bolt was truly home. A sudden, bone-chilling draft, colder than anything the decaying structure should have been able to muster, snaked around my ankles, extinguishing 3 of my carefully lit candles. I cursed under my breath, turning back, and froze. An 8th candle now burned in the candelabrum. Its flame was taller than the others, an almost incandescent spear of light. And it wasn't the warm yellow of beeswax. It was a sickly, bilious green, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. It cast elongated, grotesque shadows that danced on the reredos behind the altar, making the faded depiction of the Last Supper look like a gathering of ghouls. The sharp scent of sulfur, unmistakable and accusatory, pricked my nostrils, overlaying the persistent metallic tang. My heart hammered against my ribs. The 8th flame, uninvited, I stared, mesmerized and terrified, as it burned with a cold, unwavering intensity. I didn't dare go near it. Shivering, I retreated to the small sacristy, a marginally less oppressive space. Here, I found a stack of old parish ledgers, their leather bindings cracked and mildewed. Most were illegible, the ink bled into watery blurs. But one, newer than the rest, perhaps from the church's last active days, contained lists of baptisms, marriages, deaths. Then, abruptly, the careful script changed. A spidery, almost frantic hand had scrawled a list of children's names. Dozens of them. Simple, old-fashioned names. Thomas, Elijah, Sarah, Elspeth. Beside the last name, a date was circled in faded red ink. October 17th, 1888. The year of the Lost Lullaby mine disaster, according to my hasty pre-arrival research. The subsequent pages were utterly blank, as if the church itself had given up recording life after that day. Just as the first gray, reluctant hint of dawn began to seep through the grimy eastern windows, a rapping at the narthex door startled me so badly, I nearly dropped my lantern. Peering through a crack, I saw the silhouette uniformed man, Deputy Marcus Cole. His patrol vehicle was parked silently outside. "Just checking on things, Mr. Mercer," he said when I unbolted the door, his voice deceptively casual. He was younger than I expected, with a hard, weathered face that didn't match his years, and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Old Father Thorn, he worries. Place like this, remote. Anything can happen." His gaze swept the interior of the church, lingering for a moment on the altar, where, I noted with a fresh jolt, only 7 candles now burned. The 8th, and its sickly green flame, inexplicably gone, leaving no trace of wax or soot. Cole's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Hollow Creek likes its quiet, Mr. Mercer. Best for everyone if it stays that way." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an instruction, wrapped in a thin veneer of law enforcement concern. As his vehicle crunched away on the gravel, I stood in the nascent daylight, exhaustion warring with a gnawing dread. The church felt subtly different now, as if a veil had thinned. And then I heard it, a faint, almost inaudible sigh, soft as a child's breath, seeming to emanate from directly behind the pulpit, as if someone sleeping there had just been disturbed by the rising sun. My blood ran cold. The memories in this place weren't just old. They were active. The following days were a blur of fitful sleep, in my cheap motel room 20 miles away, and obsessive, late-night online research into Hollow Creek. Information was frustratingly scarce. The Lost Lullaby disaster was mentioned in archived newspaper snippets, always briefly, focused quickly, shifting to the mine's wealthy East Coast owners and their financial losses, rather than the human cost. The sheer number of child laborers who perished was hinted at, then glossed over, a stain the official record seemed eager to erase. But erased histories, I knew, had a habit of festering. My second night at St. Michael's was colder, the silence more pregnant. I lit my 7 candles, defiantly avoiding even looking at the 8th prong. Just after 2 a.m., it began, a low melodic humming, so faint at first, I thought it was the wind in the eaves. Then it resolved into distinct notes, then voices, children, singing a wordless, achingly melancholic lullaby that seemed to drift up from the very flagstones beneath the pews. The sound was heart-wrenchingly beautiful, filled with an innocent sorrow that tugged at something deep within me. Then, without warning, the melody shifted, became subtly discordant, the sorrow tinged with an eerie, inviting quality. The coppery smell in the air intensified, now mixed with the cloying scent of damp earth and something else, coal dust. It was as if the mine itself was breathing up through the floor. I found myself inching towards the chancel, peering at joins in the stonework, an overwhelming compulsion to find a trapdoor, a hidden stairwell consuming me. The church has no basement accessible to the living. Thorn had said. The implicit warning screamed in my head. I fought the urge, my knuckles white as I gripped the back of a pew, the wood cold and splintered beneath my fingers. The next afternoon, driven by a need for answers that outweighed my caution, I sought out Agnes Holloway. Her cabin, a ramshackle affair on the edge of the blighted woods that encircled Hollow Creek, looked as though it had grown out of the poisoned soil itself. She was a formidable figure, her face a mask of wrinkles, her eyes like chips of obsidian. She greeted me with a loaded shotgun and a look that could curdle milk. But when I mentioned the children singing and told her the names I'd found in the parish ledger, a flicker of something, ancient grief perhaps, softened the granite of her expression. So, the buried choir still seeks an audience, she rasped, her voice like stones grinding together. She lowered the shotgun, but her suspicion remained. She spoke in cryptic pronouncements about the earth remembering its own deaths that echo through generations. When I pressed her about the church, she spat. That ain't no house, Scylla. It's a wound, and some wounds, they fester. Before I left, as the sun began to dip, painting the blighted landscape in hues of orange and purple, Agnes pressed a small, tarnished silver bell into my hand. It was old, intricately engraved with weeping willows and what looked like tiny, sleeping cherubs. Some songs are only meant for certain ears, city man, she croaked, her eyes suddenly sharp and knowing. If the lullaby gets too persuasive, ring this. But be warned, everything in Hollow Creek has a price. Every silence broken, every debt acknowledged. It all adds to the tally. Her words felt less like advice and more like a prophecy. As I walked away, I could hear her humming a tuneless, discordant melody, a chilling counterpoint to the phantom choir of St. Michael's. The sense of being watched within St. Michael's became a constant companion. It was in the way shadows pulled too deeply in the corners, the way drafts seemed to follow me, cold and inquisitive, the way the ancient timbers creaked and groaned as if under an immense, invisible weight. My skepticism was eroding, replaced by a primal, nerve-shredding fear. I started barricading the narthex door with a heavy wooden beam I found in the bell tower. A futile gesture against whatever lurked within, but a small comfort nonetheless. The job wasn't worth my sanity, but the advance was spent, and the shame of crawling back to my old life, tail between my legs, was a powerful motivator. For now. The third rule tested itself shortly after 3 a.m. on my fourth night. I was huddled in the sacristy, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, when a strange, watery light began to spill from the main nave. Cautiously, I peered out. The large stained glass window to the left of the altar, depicting St. Michael with his spear, transfixing a grotesque, cowering dragon, was animated. Not just light passing through it, but the image itself was rippling, like a reflection in disturbed water. As I watched, transfixed in horror, St. Michael's beatific face slowly twisted, the painted compassion contorting into a leering, predatory grin. His halo dimmed, becoming a thorny crown. The dragon beneath his spear writhed, and its scales seemed to resolve into a screaming, writhing mass of tiny, trapped human forms, their faces contorted in agony. My breath hitched, recite the Lord's Prayer backward. Thorn's words. My mind, numb with terror, fumbled for the words. Slamming my eyes shut, I began, my voice a choked whisper. Nima, reviled tub. Noitat met otni tonzu da el dia. The air temperature plummeted, a charnel miasma filling my nostrils, acrid sulfur, and a cloyingly sweet odor, like flowers left to rot on a grave. A pressure built against my eyelids, as if something was trying to pry them open, to force me to look. I squeezed them tighter, my recitation accelerating, stumbling over the reversed syllables. Sevigrof USA. Suserpsart ruosu evigrof dia. The presence, vast and malevolent, seemed to loom just inches from my face. When I finally gasped out, Nea inicitrao, retafru. The pressure vanished. The cloying scent receded, leaving only the usual dust and decay. Trembling, I dared to open my eyes. The window was as it had been. St. Michael serene, the dragon vanquished. But the afterimage, the demonic saint, and the souls trapped in scales, was seared onto my retinas. What came to worship after 3 a.m. wasn't human. The next day, when Father Thorn arrived to relieve me, he looked even more spectral than usual. His skin stretched thin over his sharp bones, his eyes holding a deep, weary sorrow. I confronted him, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "What is this place, Father? What really happened here?" He sighed, a sound like autumn leaves skittering across a tombstone. "This church, Mr. Mercer, ministers to a congregation with unique needs. Needs that transcend the veil. Some souls are tied to a place by grief, by trauma, by unfinished penance. We merely offer them a sanctuary, a place to be heard. Boundaries must be maintained for their sake and for ours." His explanation felt like a carefully constructed lie, concealing a far more monstrous truth. That afternoon, Agnes Holloway was waiting for me by my car, parked a safe half-mile from the church. She didn't speak, just pressed a heavy leather-bound journal into my hands. It was brittle with age, the pages foxed and water-stained. "My great-grandmother's," she said, her voice flat. She was one of the first in Hollow Creek before the silence fell completely. She saw things, wrote things. Maybe a city man like you can make sense of what fools like her only feared. Back in my motel room, with a bottle of cheap whiskey for courage, I began to read. The script was archaic. The ink faded. But the story it told was one of growing dread. A covenant made in desperation. A church built not to banish an old darkness, but to contain it. To feed it with the town's own sorrow. The Hungry Hill, her ancestor called St. Michael's Perch. It demands its tithe. The following morning, as I made my pre-dawn check after another night of strained vigilance, I found them near a small, rarely used side chapel door. Almost hidden by overgrown weeds were fresh, muddy footprints, very small, child-sized, and they led into the church. There were no tracks leading out. The coppery smell hit me then, stronger than ever, and with it, a wave of unimaginable, crushing despair. The church wasn't just haunted, it was actively taking. The storm hit Hollow Creek just after dusk, a savage, black-hearted tempest that mirrored the roiling chaos in my own soul. Rain lashed against the boarded windows of St. Michael's, like angry fists, and the wind shrieked through the gaps in the decaying roof, a chorus of the damned. Inside, the usual oppressive silence was shattered by the thunder's percussive cannons, and the groan of ancient timbers fighting a losing battle against the elements. Tonight, something had to break. My dwindling supply skill of whiskey, purchased in a moment, still a bleak foresight, wasn't for courage, it was for numbness. But even it couldn't dull the certainty that I couldn't endure another night of passive waiting, of being a sacrificial lamb in this unholy abattoir. Father Thorn had left earlier than usual, his frail form buffeted by the rising wind. His parting words, "The storm will pass, Mr. Mercer." Some nights are simply more vocal than others, ringing with a chilling prescience. Vocal, yes, that was one word for it. Fueled by a potent cocktail of cheap rye, simmering terror, and a desperate, reckless defiance, I stared at the altar candelabrum. The first rule, never light more than 7. Tonight, I wasn't just going to light 7. I was going to actively defy the eighth. I placed only 6 candles, leaving the 7th and 8th prongs conspicuously bare. A small rebellion, perhaps. But it felt like drawing a line in the desecrated dust of this cursed place. "Come on, then," I muttered to the oppressive darkness. "Show me your hand." The response was immediate and terrifying, as if on cue with a particularly violent crack of thunder that shook the very foundations of the church. The 7th prong, the one I'd left empty, burst into flame, not the bilious green from before, but a ravenous, roaring orange that clawed at the air, and beside it, an instant later, the 8th ignited with an audible crack, its flame a column of pure, shadow-devouring white, so intense it seared after images onto my retinas. The 2 uninvited flames towered over the others, casting monstrous, elongated shadows that writhed and pulsed on the flaking walls. Shadows that seemed to pull away from the very fabric of the church, taking on a terrifying 3-dimensional solidity. The sulfurous stench was back, thick enough to gag on, mixed with the damp, earthy smell of an open grave. Then, the singing. It erupted from beneath my feet, not the sorrowful lullaby of previous nights, but a wild, hungry, demanding chorus. The sound wasn't just in my ears. It vibrated through the flagstones, up through the soles of my boots, into my very bones. The floorboards beneath the main altar, directly over where I'd heard the tapping, began to splinter and crack with a sound like snapping bone. They buckled upwards, then collapsed inwards, revealing a dark, yawning chasm beneath the church, the sealed entrance to the lost lullaby mine. And from that Stygian darkness, pale, small, dirt-stained hands reached up, blindly grasping, their movements disturbingly childlike, yet imbued with an unnatural strength. As if this cacophony of horrors wasn't enough, the remaining intact stained glass windows didn't just rattle, they exploded inwards, not from the wind, which howled impotently outside, but as if struck by an immense invisible battering ram from within. Shards of colored glass rained down like deadly confetti through the jagged, gaping holes. I saw not the raging storm, but a swirling, chaotic void, a maelstrom of non-Euclidean geometry, a vortex of impossible colors, and within it, countless, luminous, accusing eyes, all fixed on me. And then they began to step through. They weren't thorns vaguely alluded to congregation. They were tall, gaunt figures, impossibly elongated, clad in the tattered, filth-encrusted remains of 19th century miners' clothes. Their faces were lost in shadow, deep recesses where features should have been. But from those hollows, twin pinpricks of the same sickly green light as the original 8th candle burned with malevolent intelligence. The Penitent, in its truest, most terrifying form, had arrived. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, their heavy phantom boots making no sound on the debris-strewn floor. I stumbled back, scrambling for an escape. But the main narthex door, my only viable exit, creaked open. It wasn't the wind. Father Alistair Thorne stood framed in the doorway, no longer frail, but somehow amplified by the storm and the chaos within his accursed church. He held not a crucifix, but a gnarled staff of blackened wood, topped with what looked horrifically like a mummified human hand. He began to chant, a torrent of guttural, clicking syllables that resonated with the unholy chorus from the chasm. "The hour of reckoning is upon us, Mr. Mercer." Thorne's voice, no longer soft, boomed over the storm, imbued with an unnatural power. "The tithe is due. Your service, your soul begins now. Your hour." Behind him, Deputy Marcus Cole materialized from the storm's lashing rain, his face a mask of grim fanaticism, a pump-action shotgun leveled steady in his hands. "No one leaves Hollow Creek once they've heard the midnight bells, Mercer," Cole snarled, his eyes gleaming with a fervent, unsettling light. "Their sorrow is the town's only peace. Your penance ensures it. Then, a new horror. Agnes Holloway appeared from the side chapel, her face a mask of crazed, grief-stricken hope. She was pushing a child-sized, crudely made wooden coffin ahead of her, its lid slightly ajar. "My little lamb, Thomas. He's been so lonely," she wailed, her voice cracking. "He needs a friend to guide him to the new flock, Mr. Mercer. Someone strong to lead the way. Your soul, it burns so brightly. It will do nicely to light his path." With a strength I wouldn't have believed her capable of, she lunged, trying to shove me towards the open chasm, and the eagerly grasping, dirt-caked hands of the child spirits. Trapped. The mining specters advanced. Thorn chanted. Cole aimed. Agnes shoved. My mind raced, a frantic scramble for survival. The silver bell Agnes had given me. Where was it? My pocket. My hand fumbled, closed around its cold metal. As the first of the child hands brushed against my boot, its touch burning like freezer burn, I yanked out the bell and shook it violently. The small tarnished bell emitted a surprisingly clear, piercing chime that cut through the cacophony. The effect was instantaneous and startling. The child spirits recoiled as if struck, their pale hands snatching back from the edge of the chasm. Faint, distressed whimpers replacing their hungry chorus. The advancing mining specters faltered, their green eyes dimming for a split second, their shadowy forms flickering. Even Thorn's guttural chant hitched. Some songs are only meant for certain ears. Everything here has a price. Agnes' words. The momentary distraction was all I had. My eyes fell upon the heavy, leather-bound journal Agnes had given me, lying forgotten on a nearby pew where I'd been reading it earlier. Her ancestors' words. The hungry hill. It demands its tithe, but fears the true names of those it first consumed. The ledger in the sacristy, the list of children's names. A desperate, insane gamble. Thomas, Sarah, Elijah. I screamed their names from the ledger, the names from the lost lullaby, into the howling chaos. They lied to you. This isn't peace. This is torment. The effect was more profound than the bell. The child spirits stilled, their grasping hands now held out, almost pleadingly. The mining specters, the penitent, flinched, their shadowed forms wavering as if struck by a physical blow. A wave of pure, concentrated sorrow, a psychic scream of betrayal and grief, washed over the church, so potent it brought even Thorn and Cole to their knees for a moment. Agnes shrieked, "No! Don't listen to him, my lambs! He seeks to divide the flock." But her voice was lost in the rising tide of spectral agony. This wasn't just a haunting. It was an open wound, and I had just poured salt into it. The very air crackled with raw, untamed supernatural energy, and the battle for St. Michael's, and my soul, had truly begun. The church had become a vortex of raw, untamed emotion. My defiant shouts of the children's names, names the penitent had perhaps sought to erase or absorb, had driven a wedge into their spectral unity. The child spirits, no longer a hungry chorus, were now a chorus of individual laments, their tiny ethereal forms flickering between sorrow and a dawning, ghostly fury. They turned, not on me, but towards the towering, shadowed figures of the miners, their original betrayers, their first tormentors. The penitent recoiled, their shadowy forms wavering, their sickly green eyes blinking, as if against a sudden, unexpected light. The carefully constructed illusion of a unified congregation was shattering. Taking desperate advantage of the momentary chaos, I grabbed the heavy, iron-tipped processional cross that lay discarded near the altar, a relic from a more devout, or perhaps more naive, era of St. Michael's. It probably held no true holy power here, not anymore, but it was solid, heavy, and a symbol, however tarnished, as Thorn, recovering from the psychic backlash, raised his staff of mummified bone to resume his unholy chanting. I brought the cross down hard on the arm holding the vile implement. There was a sickening crack of old bone. Thorns, not the staff's. And he screamed, a thin, reedy sound that was all too human. The staff clattered to the flagstones. Deputy Cole, his face contorted with rage and a dawning fanatic fear, raised his shotgun. Blasphemer, you'll burn for this. But before he could fire, one of the larger, more defined child spirits, little Thomas perhaps, emboldened by the invocation of his name, drifted with terrifying speed towards him, its tiny hands outstretched, its eyes now glowing with a sorrowful, accusatory light. Cole yelped, a sound of pure, primal terror, stumbling backward, firing a wild shot into the already ravaged ceiling. He tripped over a fallen pew and scrambled away, crab walking towards the shattered narthex, his bravado utterly broken by direct, undeniable supernatural contact. He fled out into the screaming storm, leaving the door to bang uselessly in the wind. Agnes Holloway was a different story. Her grief had curdled into a terrifying, possessive madness. "They are my children," she shrieked, trying to shield the mouth-cilla chasm with her own frail body, as if to protect the penitent from the very souls they had consumed. He promised they would never be alone. She lunged at me, her nails like talons, but the anguished cries of the child spirits, now swirling around the chasm like a miniature spectral vortex, seemed to disorient her. The turning point came not from any action of mine, but from the church itself, or rather, from the unstable ground beneath it. The storm outside reached a new crescendo, and with a groan that seemed to emanate from the very bowels of the earth, the chancel floor, already weakened, gave way entirely. A significant portion, including the heavy stone altar and the area where Agnes stood wailing, collapsed into the gaping maw Silamine shaft with a deafening roar of splintering wood and grinding stone. Agnes vanished with a final, despairing cry, swallowed by the darkness she had courted. Father Thorn, clutching his broken arm, scrabbled at the edge of the newly widened abyss, his face a mask of terror and disbelief. The power he'd wielded, the pact he'd maintained, was literally crumbling beneath him. The child's spirits, their laments reaching a fever pitch, swirled around him, their tiny hands no longer grasping, but pulling. He screamed as they dragged him, inch by inch over the precipice and into the blackness of the lost lullaby. His final choked cry was swallowed by the earth. In the penitent specters, their power source, the church, the suffering, perhaps Thorn himself, disrupted, began to fade. Their shadowy forms grew translucent, their green eyes dimmed, and with a final collective sigh that sounded like wind through 1,000 broken windows, they were drawn back, down into the depths from whence they came. The unholy eighth candle, and its towering white flame, sputtered and died. The hungry chorus was silenced as the first true rays of dawn, pale and tentative after the storm's fury, began to pierce through the shattered stained glass windows and the holes in the roof. The oppressive atmosphere in St. Michael's lifted. It wasn't peace, not by a long shot, but the active, malevolent presence was gone. The church was a wreck, a disaster zone of splintered wood, shattered glass, and gaping holes. A faint smell of ozone from the storm mingled with the lingering sulfur and the damp earth Silamine. I stood there, shaking, battered, covered in dust and grime, the iron cross still clutched in my hand, the sole living witness to the night's unholy desecration. Hollow Creek had claimed its due. Months later, the chill Scylla Hollow Creek still clung to my bones, a phantom ache that no amount of distance or sunshine could fully exorcise. I wrote the story, The Hollow Creek Vigil, a night among the damned. It was raw, visceral, and filled with details no sane editor should have touched. Yet this time, it didn't destroy me. Perhaps it was the sheer unhinged conviction in my writing, or perhaps the unexplained seismic tremors recorded in that remote part of Colorado that very night, coupled with some blurry, inconclusive satellite imagery showing anomalous thermal activity around what was once St. Michael's Church, lent it a sliver Scylla credibility it wouldn't have otherwise had. It didn't make me a journalistic hero. It made me that guy. The one who wrote the crazy ghost story that might, just might, have had a kernel Scylla truth. I found a niche, a small shadowed corner in the world Scylla paranormal investigation and Fortean journalism. A place where my particular brand Scylla damaged goods was, if not celebrated, at least tolerated, at least to the foreign currency. The scent of sulfur, the sound of children singing hymns, the flickering of a candle in a darkened room. These things were no longer innocuous. They were triggers, tiny keys that unlocked the cold, dark box in my mind where the memories Scylla St. Michael's festered. Sleep was often a battlefield, filled with grasping hands and eyes like dying embers. One crisp autumn evening, seeking a moment of quiet contemplation I knew I wouldn't find, I found myself wandering into an old, almost forgotten church in a quiet neighborhood of the city I now called home. It smelled of beeswax and old hymnals, a comforting, familiar scent. I sat in a worn oak pew, idly watching the play of late afternoon light through a relatively simple stained glass window. On the altar, a single candelabrum held 7 unlit candles. I smiled wryly. 7. A safe number. Then, without a sound, without a flicker of movement from me or any discernible draft, a tiny flame winked into existence on one of the wicks. It grew, steady and sure, a clear, unwavering light. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, thinking it was a trick Scylla light, a remnant Scylla my trauma. But the flame remained, and then, slowly, deliberately, another candle, beside the first, ignited itself. The 8th flame. My heart began to hammer, a frantic, familiar rhythm against my ribs. The comforting scent of beeswax and old hymnals was suddenly, subtly, overlaid with the faint coppery tang of disturbed earth and something else. Something that smelled like cold, ancient sorrow. I didn't need to turn to see if the depictions in the stained glass were shifting. I didn't need to wait for the whispers to begin. The psychic scar tissue. Scylla Hollow Creek throbbed with a terrible, knowing ache. Later that week, a small, anonymously sent package arrived at my cramped apartment. No return address. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried, brittle leaves that looked suspiciously like those from the blighted woods around Hollow Creek, was a small, tarnished silver bell. Beneath it, a yod, handwritten in a spidery, elegant script that was disturbingly familiar. Though I couldn't quite place it, it read, "The congregation is always seeking new voices, Mr. Mercer. Some silences are too profound to remain unbroken. We know you can still hear the songs. When you are ready, the midnight bells will guide you." The toll from Hollow Creek, it seemed, was still being collected. And the silence I knew with a chilling certainty was only ever temporary. The Hungry Hill, or places like it, always found a way to demand their tithe. The vigil, in some form or another, would never truly end. St. Michael's holds its secrets close, and the ground remembers those it has swallowed. Jacob Mercer learned that some truths come with a terrifying cost. The rules were just a fragile shield against a horror waiting in the darkness. The congregation is silenced, for now. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the ultimate revelation. The twist that reveals the true, terrifying scope of Hollow Creek's reach. The last few moments change everything. What do you think the Penitent truly are? What was Father Thorn trying to contain? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it through the night in Hollow Creek, if the Hungry Hill hasn't claimed you, then you're already a part of our story. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules. Because some debts are eternal, and the vigil is always waiting.